Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay. So I think you should be able to see my screen. And we're going to get started right away with the webinar. Thank you so much for joining. So I know everyone is joining us from different parts of the world. So I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us. My name is Shyvonne Henry. I'm Practical Actions Africa Partnerships and Special Initiatives Lead. And I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today as part of Practical Actions campaign for the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. So the title of today's webinar is Transforming Gender, Deconstructing the Intersection Between Gender Power and Violence. So as we all know, gender-based violence is a grave violation of human rights, and it poses a significant threat to the health and well-being of individuals. It can manifest itself in different forms, and it's deeply rooted and entrenched in patriarchal hostility towards women's rights, gender inequality, and the abuse of patriarchal power, as well as harmful social norms. One of the key indicators of gender inequality lies in the distribution of power between men and women. And throughout different societies and settings, men have traditionally held more power than women. They enjoy greater access to valuable resources, possess formal authority, and benefit from established legal systems. Gender-based violence includes all forms of violence that are perpetuated against individuals on the basis of their sex or gender identity, and it reflects the existing power imbalances between men and women. So understanding the link between power and violence is a crucial step towards women's empowerment and effectively addressing gender-based violence as individuals through collective movements, as well as programmatically. As development actors, we must incorporate gender considerations in all of our work. Additionally, as individuals, we need to understand these concepts and these dynamics so that we can take informed actions and make decisions within our spheres of influence to prevent and eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. During today's webinar, we will delve into the role of gender transformative approaches in development programming. We'll be spotlighting practical examples and explore how individuals can responsibly use their personal as well as collective power to influence and address gender inequality in your everyday lives, as well as in your community. To bring today's webinar to life, we're pleased to welcome our 4 expert speakers in the areas of gender and gender transformation, namely Hope Chigudu, Muna Eltahir, Anna Perez, and Bruktawit Fakadu, who will share with us their valuable experiences, their ideas, insights, as well as recommendations. Apologies for that. So our moderator for today's Q&A portion of the webinar is Practical Actions West Africa Regional Director Edwin Obiero. And we will end today's session with closing remarks from Practical Actions Africa Director Akini Wallander. So before we start with today's webinar, I mentioned earlier that Practical Action is hosting this webinar as part of our Global Unite campaign for the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. And the 16 Days of Activism is originating from the first Women's Global Leadership Institute, and it's sponsored by the Center for Women's Global Leadership and began in 1991. It's an international campaign, and it's used as an organizing strategy by individuals as well as organizations around the world to call for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. So during the 16 Days of Activism, communities around the world join in the call to prevent, to eliminate the violence against women and girls. Since 1991, over 3,700 organizations in approximately 164 countries have participated in the 16 Days campaign. Some of the key goals of the Unite campaign include raising awareness about gender-based violence, such as human rights issues at the local, national, regional, and international levels, strengthening the local work around violence against women, establishing a clear link between local and international work to end violence against women, providing a forum in which organizers can develop and share new and effective strategies, demonstrating the solidarity of women around the world organizing against violence against women, and creating tools to pressure governments to implement promises made to eliminate violence against women and girls. So the 16 days runs every year from the 25th of November to the 10th of December. These days are chosen symbolically to link violence against women and human rights, and to emphasize that such violence is a violation of human rights. Therefore, the 16-day period also highlights other significant dates, including last Saturday, November 25th, the International Day Against Violence Against Women, November 29th, which is tomorrow, the International Women Human Rights Defenders Day, and December 10th, the International Human Rights Day. This year, the United Nations marks 16 days under Unite theme, Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls. By using #NoExcuse as a slogan or a hashtag, the campaign calls for financing different prevention strategies and transforming social norms to end violence against women and girls. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. So before I introduce our first speaker, I'd just like to confirm that she is in the room, and yes, she is. Okay, so please allow me to introduce our first speaker, Hope. And Hope is a practical action trustee, intersectional feminist, and an organizational development specialist. Please allow me to also introduce her through her biography. So Hope is an uncontainable feminist activist with decades of experience in feminist movement building and feminist leadership development. Over the years, Hope has honed her skills in organizational development, health, and the well-being of individuals and the collective, a holistic approach where people are the focus and their needs, emotions and senses are supported and enhanced, and as enunciated in a book in which she co-authored titled Strategies for Building Organizations with a Soul. Hope is also the co-founder of the Zimbabwe Resource Center and Network for Just Associates. Hope has furthermore served on the boards of the Global Fund for Women, the Urgent Action Fund Africa, Global Fund for the Community Foundation, and Oxfam South Africa. She currently serves on Practical Action's Board of Trustees. Hope lives in Uganda and Zimbabwe, but she also lives in her body and anywhere where her tribe is, in organizations, well-being circles, or simply in places of joy, excitement, creativity, and imagination. Hope finds home in places where we are collectively lifted, lightened, where power pulsates through us from above, below, around, and runs through, transforming all that is within and without, leaving our bellies bursting with joy. She was raised and nurtured by the Bakiga people of Western Uganda. They are farmers, healers, storytellers, craft makers, dancers, and they are brutally honest. They are people who understand the importance of art, of building communities, of support and flourishing under difficult circumstances. They embody political beliefs through their everyday practice. The Bakiga are constantly moving, swaying, flowing, a flow of constant change. When not engaged in her organizational work and wellness circles, you can find Hope designing clothes and creating new dishes in her kitchen. You'll also find her engaging with young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you Hope Chigudu. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to talk about gender, power, and violence. And I'm going to use an analogy of the master's house as a tool for understanding power and violence against women. The master's house is a house of oppression. And I have chosen it because it's a tool that you too can use in your work. So at the end of my presentation, I hope you have a tool that you can take home and use in your organization, your community, your family, or wherever you are. So here we go. I would like you to imagine a house of operation that we call the master's house. This is a house where power, violence, oppression, subordination are found. So to help us understand this, I would like you to engage in an exercise in your heads where you have a house, and the pillars of this house are very, very patriarchal. In other words, the pillars are made by people who wield power, whether they are men or women, whatever they are, but this power is patriarchal. It's power exercised over other people, like the power of the police, the power some of our institutions have, that is power over. So this master's house, its pillars are composed of family. And I want you to take a moment and think about what happens at family level. When you think about women within families that you know, what is their position? When we read about violence against women every day, you know, what do we understand? Most of this violence happens within the home. It happens within houses. And as far as I know, feminism is the ideology that opens a door, gets into someone's house, checks what is happening in the bedroom and under the bed, and uncovers some of the secrets that we don't even admit to ourselves. So if you think about a family and you think about a house, think about what happens in terms of incest, think about what happens in terms of proper violence, think about what happens in terms of denying food, think about what happens in terms of fights, think about what happens in our families, in our houses. So the house itself is a pillar of patriarchy. And I hope you can take the time to imagine it in your heads and not even to deny. And the power that is here, that is in this house, is the one that tells a woman that she's a subordinate, no matter how important she is, that she should never say what happens within a home. As they say, many in Africa, I don't know about other countries, are told that what happens in a home should be kept there. Don't speak up. Therefore, no voice. Even when some of the women who are married, when they are getting married, they are told that they should never say what happens in the home, and yet this is where violence happens. So if you are doing work, you are doing community work, you are doing, activist work, you are doing religious work, whatever work you are doing, even if it is government, and you want to understand violence against women and you want to fight it, start with the family, start with the house, that house where people dwell, and try and unpack it, thread by thread, and you see where violence happens and where the culture of violence comes in. And women who speak out in these families are castigated. They are bad women. So if you are called a good woman, maybe it's not always important to be a good woman. But anyway, it might not be bad to be a bad woman and speak out against violence. So I want to go to the second pillar, and this is community. If you think about communities, what do they say about violence against women? What are their views? How many women have been castigated at community level because they speak up? How many have been castigated because they are not supposed to hold positions? I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Hope, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. How many women can't even be community leaders just because they are women? And when a woman does something that community thinks, it's not right, she's asserting her rights. What kind of woman are you? Are you married? Are you single? Even when a woman wants to join politics, the first question is, are you married? Are you single? If you are single, what kind of woman are you? If you are married, who has a voice? Is it you or your spouse? That happens at community level. So community as a pillar of the house of oppression or master's house is very strong. And we cannot make change happen without addressing issues at community level. So sit and think about the oppression you have witnessed in communities, or oppression that really is open and sometimes glaring, that even when there is rape, a woman is the one who is seen as, the one who was not dressed right, the one who was walking late at night, even if she's coming from work, the one who is loud, the one who doesn't respect men. So when something happens at that community level, that is when you see violence being unleashed to the one who has been violated and less to the one who violated. I want to go to the third pillar, and this is religion, which I know is very, very sensitive. So I'll talk about it with respect, and I'm not pointing out anyone, but also say that can be a scent of religion. In the Christian faith, they will say women should obey their husbands, whether the husband is a thief, whether he's a violator, whether he's that one who goes to work for bread and eats it on the way. It doesn't matter, just obey. Obey. It doesn't matter that you're a leader, that you know that you have a voice, that you have led millions and thousands. Obey, obey, obey. Religion is interesting, but can also be a tool of oppression. If you are open enough as to really, unpack it and see its different aspects. It has got its beauty, but like most institutions, it has also got its oppressive practices against women. And these practices are hidden. It's hidden power. It's hidden power. When one is being oppressed, they can't even see it. They actually defend their oppression because God said so, because, some people sat and said that a woman is a subordinate and should obey. But let me not dwell on that very much and move on to education and other institutions. In our education systems, where does knowledge come from? Who teaches us to be who we later come to be? Where are women's voices in the education system? Who is consulted? So we get introduced to education at an early age, and we absorb everything that is given to us. It is never interrogated, and it doesn't start with where communities are or even where women are. It is from above, and then it goes down instead of coming from down and then build upwards. And most of the education materials, the systems, the structures do not support women's liberation or women's emancipation. In fact, they reinforce subordination of women. And again, this is done in a subtle way. The power there is invisible. You don't see it, but you are being shaped. You are being shaped from an early age. And from that shaping, you grow up knowing that, yeah, it's okay. Men have got permission to do whatever they want to do with women because they are heads of households. Heads of households. It doesn't matter, how one defines heads of household, but they are told the men are told they are heads of households. And this is a burden. This is a burden. I'm not blaming men, no. I'm talking about the interaction between men and women. It's a burden in the sense that a man has to live up to the expectations of society. Manhood. Pretend you are strong even when you are weak. And even when you want to cry, go and hide. You can't cry openly. It's not acceptable. So I want to go to culture and tradition. And I don't know if there is anything that is one of the most difficult pillars to deal with, like culture and tradition, because most of the oppressive practices are in this pillar of culture and tradition. Oh, according to our culture, women don't do this. According to our culture, it's okay to discipline a woman if she has violated the norms. According to our culture, women don't eat this. According to our culture, yeah, of course, women are subordinates. According to our culture, this and this and that. And I think that whether you're a woman or man, you are familiar with this culture. It's part of the house. It's a very, very oppressive pillar. I want to go to the state. I don't know, how far one can go with the state, because it is most of our states were created to oppress women. Whatever we fight for, there are people there who make sure that our voices never get heard. There are people there who will make sure that the laws and the policies work against women. There are people there who come from their homes very, very angry with their spouses, go to work, and woe betide any woman who asks who asks a question or who uses a language of assertiveness. That woman will have a very difficult day that day, just because someone had a hard day or fought at home or is not or doesn't like his wife very much. And just because they too went through institutions that taught them that women are subordinates, and as subordinates, if they do what society doesn't want, what the state doesn't want, they should be punished. The same oppression happens in organizations, and let alone the media. Every day you read about, stories of women and men in the media, and it's always women in the wrong. So this is Master's House. I have summarized it, but what I want to make very clear is that when we do work, it's not a question of saying that we are promoting women's projects. It's not a matter of saying that, hello? Okay. It's not a matter of saying that, women are this percentage, or we've got women and men. Look at the power dynamics, starting from the family, go to the community, think about religion, think about education, and so on and so on. And finally, it's very, very difficult to fight violence against women and fight some of the powers that are really huge, especially patriarchal power, by one person alone. We need a critical mass. We need movements. We need power of movements because the forces are huge. They are huge, and some of them I've not mentioned, and they need the power of numbers. So inviting men and women to do this, because whether you're a man or a woman, even if you're a man, you're oppressed as well. Masculinity, being forced to be a man, masculinity, manhood is not easy. And, you have daughters, you have sisters, you have cousins, you have mothers. So you have to come with us so that we don't continue to witness violence against women. So I have used the analogy of the master's house or the house of oppression. I've talked about the pillars that are in this house, and I've talked about the importance of taking these pillars one by one and understanding how oppression happens there, and after understanding how oppression there, identifying tools and strategies for fighting violence against women. And my final point was one person, one organization, even two, cannot fight violence against women alone. We need a movement. We need a critical mass to move this huge mountain of violence against women. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hope, so much for your presentation on the Master's House as a tool for understanding power and violence against women. We will be taking questions later on in the chat, so please feel free to type your questions in, and then our moderator will choose from the questions that are posted to be answered later on during the Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to our next speaker, who is Mona Eltahir. Mona is the Country Director for Practical Action's office in Sudan. Mona joined Practical Action in 2015 as Sudan's Country Director. Throughout her professional career, she has acquired a substantial and long history of experience in the humanitarian and development fields. And before joining Practical Action, Mona has worked for UN OCHA, ADRA, British Aid, the Netherlands Embassy, and Window Trust International. Mona has 2 master's degrees, one in economics of human resource development from India, and the other one is in international community development from Andrews University of Michigan, United States. Mona is a gender expert as well as a women's rights activist. So today, Mona will be sharing the perspective from Sudan as it relates to gender-based violence. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mona Eltahir. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Shyvonne. Thank you very much. Can you hear me and can you see me?
Yes, Mona.
All right. Okay. First, thank you, Hope, for your great presentation. I'm sure each and every participant in this webinar feels you are speaking about him or about her. Very, very, very inspiring presentation. Today, I'm honored to be here, and I'm going to speak from Sudan perspective. And all of you know that we are going through a very, very bad war that affects all the countries, and we are here all being refugees. And conflicts like made the situation worse for women because women are the mostly impacted by the war and by any kind of conflict or man-made or natural-made disaster that might take place in any place in this world. I'm going to speak about the gender-based violence and conflict in Sudan. I'm going to speak about the types of GBV in Sudan. I speak a little bit about the legal framework, and then I'm going to highlight what practical action is doing in order to address the gender-based violence and women subordination in the country. The gender-based violence conflict in Sudan. Sudan is a developing country. Developing countries are not underdeveloped because of the economics. It's about the culture, about the attitude, about the behavior of the people, about how they value human being and value women. In Sudan, there are over 3 million women who are at risk for gender-based violence. And when the war broke in April 15, this is intensified the gender-based violence in Sudan, and consequently the amount raised from 3 million to 4.2 million. Unfortunately, all this number is not reported. The Combating Violence Against Women unit in Sudanese Police Department stated that only 2% of the violation is reported. So the rest are undercover because of the stigma, because of the shame, because of the women are not supposed to speak. And here, Hope spoke a lot about this point, that if you are going under gender-based violence, you are not supposed to speak. You just keep quiet. And I'm going to speak more on the next slides about this fact of being silent. Okay, gender-based violence in Sudan. Carry on, Shyvonne. Yes? Carry on.
Apologies, Mona. I'm just having a bit of a technical issue.
It's okay.
Okay, I think you should be seeing again now.
Okay, yes. It's seen now. Just go down to the next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay. We have several types of gender-based violence. First, we speak about the domestic violence. Domestic violence does mean the master house, which Hope spoke about it. It's practiced by the husband, by the brother, younger or older brother, it doesn't matter, even by the neighbor, so long as they're men, they can subordinate women and practice violence against them. So any man has a right to practice violence, domestic violence for women, and cannot be questioned. Sexual violence, it's for the subordinated women, the marginalized, who are occupying like marginalized or less skilled occupations, such as selling tea, making food on the street, refugees, IDPs, the women who are fetching firewoods, getting water. So those people are all subjected to all kind of sexual violence, because they're not protected and they are not heard. Their voice are not heard. Next, then again, there is a psychological violence, which is the verbal violence. It's everywhere, even in very sophisticated offices. Like, people can speak about bad jokes, can talk like nonsense for women, stating this is something to some extent accepted culturally. So it is something that is not stigmatized for men. So they feel that they have the right to do that. When you speak about economic violence, it's about denying their right to get educated, to be economically empowered, to have no control over the financial resources, even if it is owned by the women themselves, which is very unfortunate, to have your salary, not to have the right to do what you want to do with the man that you own by your own. This is one of the most what you call it? It's the most I would call it subordinating kind of a violence. You own money and it's taken from you, or you are not being granted the right on how to spend the money. Forced marriage and child marriage, it is not criminalized by law. So there is no a minimum age for the marriage. A woman or a girl who's 8 years can be taken from the school and get married to her relatives, or it could be determined by the tribe leaders or by the father or by the uncle. Female genital mutilation, it's about removal of external female genitalia through unprofessional medical attendees for non-health reasons. It's about denying the women sexual rights, because they want women to practice sex or to enjoy sex, because this is not right to be given. It's bringing a shame to the community. So they completely mutilate its genitalia to be unable to have a desire. Polygamy is widely spread like many other African countries, which is also part of the culture, part of the religious norms. And as it is legalized, as it is accepted, so women has no right to oppose, has no right to seek a divorce because the husband got another wife. Next, we speak about the legal framework. There is no legislation for domestic violence. Marital rape is not criminalized. Again, Hope stated, if you have been raped by your husband, you have no right to say it outside of the marriage institution. You have no right to say no when you don't feel like. It is just about obeying the husband all the time, regardless to the mental or psychological status you are in. And also, again, there is no, as I said, minimum age for the marriage, for marrying the girls, which I spoke about it prior to this. Next slide. Again, the legal framework denied many other rights related to women. The guardianship, it's about freedom of movement. It's about being guarded by your father or brother, even if it's a younger brother, by the way, even if it's 8 years old and you are 40 years old, he can have his word over you. So women require permission to guardian to marry. I cannot marry by myself, even if I'm 50 years old. And the consent of your guardian is required in the court if you want to get marriage, or with a religious leader who's going to carry the process of the marriage. Inheritance, it's part of the law that women have to have half of the share compared to the male. So it is mainly because like women has no right to have power on the economic resources. So they don't have to get the full share for the inheritance. The brother can get more, she has to get less. Okay, there is Article 19 of the Labor Act. It prohibits women from taking some of the occupations. Previously was joining the army and many other occupations that we think that it can cause a health hazards. So it's not about giving her the right to say no to what she thinks it should be good for her or bad. No, it's by law should be forbidden. Divorce is another story in the legal framework in Sudan. In many Arab and Muslim countries, the husband has the right to divorce at any point of time without any obligations. The woman has no right to divorce. If she would like to have a divorce, she has to go to court. And if she goes to court, she can do something called khulu'. Khulu' means you can get the divorce, but you have to give up all your right. You have to decline your financial rights completely. And sometimes in some situation, you have to pay the man money to be able to give you your freedom. But at the same time, as I mentioned, he can go and divorce you without any obligation. Instantly by a word can take out of his mouth and the marriage is broken. This is a part of the Islamic law. It's a part of the Sudanese law, tradition and custom. And it's assured. It is not something that you can question the man. If he come home with a bad mood and find his wife not cook the food, he can just divorce her and walk out. So the marriage institution itself is not protecting women as such. Next slide, please. Okay, how we address the gender-based violence. It is somehow practical action is not a women oriented as such organization. I'm just referring to UN Women and many other women oriented organization, but we do a lot for addressing gender-based violence and women-related issues. Like for instance, we introduce clean fuel for cooking, like the stuff that you have it. Look at this beautiful woman, she's cooking her food. These women, because through a project with long procedure that she got this clean stuff for cooking her food, now she doesn't have to walk long hours to get the firewood. On the way, she can get rape, basically, especially in Darfur, while fetching the firewood. Women also are safe from the health hazards because they breathe a very clean air through using this clean stuff. Earlier, like the firewood can really make lots of health hazards to women. And beside that, since they're home, the elder girls are not supposed to stay home to take care of their younger siblings, so they have the right to go to school. So increase the percentage of the school enrollment for girls, increase the percentage of the women who do not report to the health center for having some health hazards, especially the asthma and other related diseases. And also women are stayed at home, they have enough time to do other activities. Secondly, Shyvonne, we construct water center through very sustainable supply of water. We use renewable energy, environmental friendly, and the women who are responsible for actually maintaining the problems of the water center, fixing the taps and cleaning the area and maintaining actually the sustainability of the water supply. And here again, like they don't walk to fetch the water for many hours. They have time to carry economics activities and social activities, and girls also are not obliged to go and fetch the water so they can go to school. This is something we do for all our targeted communities. And again, if girls go to school, their life would change for sure. And this is what we do. Give them water, give them clean stuff to cook in, and then they have time to go to school and do their studies. And then at the later stage became economically empowered. Next. This lady is called Amna. She is from Darfur. She is very happy with the harvesting this year because she got lots of vegetables and lots of cereals, and she's selling some of them and using some of them for nourishing her kids. And we do improve agriculture for small farmers and adopt climate change for improve their standard of living. So by increasing their production and productivities, linking them to markets so they can sell their products, and also involving them in saving fund mechanism to make the best use of the money that they gain from their agriculture activities, also make them have a better economic life. I remember very well this lady told me, now we have food in our plate, we have money in our pocket, and we send kids to school. So it is about bettering the quality of the life of women. While developing projects at that early stage, we look for the special needs of women in the targeted communities, try to address them from their own perspective rather than anybody else's perspective. So it is always bottom-up approach rather than up-down approach. So we ask women, what do you need? And then we take their needs into consideration while developing new program. This is one of the stuff is always making me feel proud of being part of practical action and part of an organization that making life slightly better for the Sudanese women. It is always women feel that they are valued because of practical action work in the communities, because we involve them in the decision making, we involve them in identifying their need, we empower them to do more work, to do something different, and to make their voice heard. Okay, Shyvonne? So the ultimate goal is to make women economically empowered, economically independent, strong, participate in decision making. All decisions that related their life to the community's life is attained, and change the mindset of the communities. Changing the mindset of the community through the women themselves by being strong enough to understand what is their role and how to express their concern and to raise their problem and to get together in one hand, united, to address the needs and to change their situation and to better their life. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona, so much for that presentation. What I found interesting is how some of the pillars that our first speaker, Hope, was talking about manifests itself in Sudan, for instance, in areas such as religion, culture, and tradition, and how that works to oppress women and favors men. I also saw a very interesting comment from Prajana about how sometimes women aid in the perpetuation of some of these harmful practices, which I think is very interesting and is probably not spoken about enough. So I hope we can delve into that a bit more during the Q&A session that we'll have later. And it was also very inspiring to see how changing women's circumstances by simply facilitating access to basic services such as water and energy can immediately, remove them from a situation where they would otherwise be exploited. And just like you, I'm really proud to be part of an organization that empowers women and contributes towards their protection. So Thank you, Mona, so much for that presentation. So right now, we'd like to move on to our next speaker. And I'm very excited to introduce Ms. Anna Perez. Anna Perez is a senior energy and gender technical advisor at RTI International. So Anna brings 25 years of experience of working in the private and development sector and over 10 years of direct experience in addressing gender inequalities in the energy sector. Her areas of expertise include conducting gender assessments, designing gender-inclusive curricula and training materials, facilitating training workshops on gender, diversity, equity, and inclusion, developing gender policies, strategies, and other gender actionable plans, coaching organizations to implement gender-inclusive HR best practices throughout the employee life cycle. Anna has led various inclusion-focused workplace initiatives in male-dominated industries, and she has provided technical gender advisory services and organizations across North America, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Ms. Perez is a certified ILO participatory gender audit PGA facilitator. Ms. Perez also has experience in setting up gender networks in highly male-dominated industries. In Canada, she co-chaired the Women's Employee Resource Group of 25,000 employee global manufacturing company. In Rwanda, she supported activities for the establishment of the Power Her Network. And at RTI International, she is currently the advisor to the Women's Advancement, Leadership, and Success Employee Resource Group. She's also the Associate Director of RTI Global Gender Center, a cross-institute center with more than 500 internal and external multidisciplinary experts working to address gender inequality. Ms. Perez holds an industrial engineering degree and an MBA from IE Business School in Madrid, Spain. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you Ms. Anna Perez. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to be sharing today about a project that I have been working on in Rwanda, specifically around strengthening the energy sector by addressing sexual harassment in the workplace. On the next slide, we can see that the government of Rwanda is committed to promote gender equality through establishing institutional policies and regulatory frameworks. The country is committed to become zero-tolerance state in issues related to gender-based violence. However, despite all these efforts made to date, there's traditional gender norms that prevail in institutions, businesses, and at homes. The energy sector is comprised of 20% of women and only very few in management and technical roles. Sexual harassment in the workplace continues to hinder and is a barrier to gender equity in both public and private organizations. On the next slide, we can see that in 2019, with funding from USAID, we conducted a gender assessment, a gender audit of the entire energy sector in Rwanda. And one of the things that came up as part of that assessment was the lack of awareness on sexual harassment that was actually happening in the sector. And the formal processes to report it was also something that was missing in some of the places. So as a result of this assessment, we can see on the next slide that to address the sexual harassment in the energy sector, the Women in Rwandan Energy Wire, in collaboration with the USAID East Africa Energy Program and other partners, launched a community of practice to strengthen the accountability to prevent sexual misconduct in the energy sector in Rwanda. And this is something where we hope mentioned earlier today about the importance of doing something as a group. So this is basically what was done here. So this group of energy companies realized that they could work together to address the issue as a whole. And like the African proverb says, if you want to go far, go together. And leveraging the power of the collective, identifying certain enablers that we see on this left hand of this slide, and specific opportunities that are shown on the right hand of the slide. There were things that were already in place that really supported this establishment of a community of practice. On the next slide, we can see that so this community of practice was established with the energy companies, and the main objective of this community of practice was to, on the previous slide, that one. The main objective was to act as a platform to share experiences, influence, collaborate, exchange knowledge, and advocate for a workplace free of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. On the next slide, we can see some of the characteristics. And the community of practice to mitigate sexual harassment is a forum that united experts in law, people who were doing investigations, prosecution, people who were working specifically on human resources, etc., from a very diverse range of organizations in the energy sector. And it was specifically to share models and best practices to address this issue. The community of practice met virtually throughout the entire time that it was run, and it was continued cooperation among the member organizations and individuals to mitigate the risks and aspire for a future free of sexual harassment. During this process, participants who were members of the community of practice learned best practices and tools from skilled facilitators that had the opportunity to develop an anti-sexual harassment policy and implement risk mitigation plans. On the next slide, you can see that the members of the community of practice participated in knowledge sharing, peer-led learning, a lot of group work that took place in the previous slide, and practical exercises. We had virtual meetings and created a WhatsApp community where it was constant communication about the addressing of sexual harassment in the workplace, and share resources on a resource library. On the next slide, we can see that this particular community of practice that was created in Rwanda contained two phases. The first phase, as we see on this slide, consisted of 8 weekly trainings for 8 weeks, where we met with these organizations. It was over 30 organizations that joined the community of practice. And we had different speakers that were joining to this series of trainings, and it was we had a very interactive workshops. On the second phase, for those participating members of the community of practice who didn't have a sexual harassment policy and were interested in developing one, we offer a coaching support throughout 8 months to allow to work together on developing these sexual harassment policies. So it was a subgroup that finished the 8-week training, that they joined these, or that benefited from these coaching sessions. On the next slide, you can see the topics that we covered during the 8-week sessions. And one of the key success factors was to engage with local organizations that were already working on these efforts. So from legal frameworks and labor law, we brought the Ministry of Public Services and Labor to deliver that particular topic. we had the Rwanda Investigation Bureau and National Public Prosecution Authority come as well and present a topic on addressing sexual harassment at work, on what are some of the reporting procedures that exist. There's one of the main things that hinder the is the lack of evidence that may say. So we address all of these issues during that community of practice, discussing it with these different groups. We had the Ministry of Gender and Family Promotion joined to look at risks, identification of risks, and preventing and response mechanisms as well. We had Transparency International to understand the sexual and gender-based dimensions of corruption in the workplace. We also recognize that engaging men in fighting against sexual harassment in the workplace is a very important component. So we were joined by Rwanda Men Resource Center for a very interactive session as well. We had the Gender Monitoring Office as well joined, and we had one of the companies of the Off-Grid Box company joined to showcase some of it's a case study on how they had gone about implementing their anti-sexual harassment policy. And our final session was a session about how to respond to gender-related microaggressions, and that's how we close this 8-week series. And on the next slide, you can see that it was we had to make it interactive. We designed different scenarios, and during the work within the group discussions, we were looking at scenarios and discussing as a group. Okay, if you had this situation, how is something that can be done to mitigate sexual harassment? For example, in this particular example was around job evaluations and promotions. And we had on the next slide another examples on how to address if we had a module talking about sexual harassment during the recruitment and induction processes. So we had here an example of a scenario that was given on these sessions to promote dialogue, and really during that dialogue on these smaller group discussions that were, as the energy sector was getting together and having these discussions, was it was like incredible to see those enlightening moments, to realize that some of them, it was based on the dialogue that was taking place and the facilitated discussion that these organizations were inspired to really go back to their organizations and put things in place. On the next slide, this one was another example of a scenario that we had about what happens in a situation where you are the person who's been confiding something that's happening at work, and would you speak up, or if there's little evidence, well, what would you do? So all of these are the type of conversations that we were having during these sessions. On the next slide, I strongly believe that the previous one. Thank you. I strongly believe that women's participation is essential to ensuring it is a bright future, not only for the women who bring their talents to it, but for the energy sector as a whole, which is why I decided to focus my career on advancing gender equality in the energy sector. In closing, I'd like to say that I believe that in order for this to be successful, we have to create a work environment that are free of sexual harassment. Today, during this campaign of 16 days of activism, I invite you to challenge harmful gender norms and invest in preventing gender-based violence. Thank you. And the next slide is just thanking you for your participation today. Just a little brief information about RTI's Global Gender Center that we have is on the next slide. You can, on the next slide, it's we have our gender center is over 90 countries around the world and has been in operations for about 9 years. So invite you to join our gender center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that very good presentation on how a practical approach to addressing gender-based violence. I think one thing that we often overlook when it comes to these discussions is how close to home gender-based violence can occur. And you talked about gender-based violence in the workplace. We have a very interesting comment from our colleague, Kelvin, who mentioned that gender-based violence, the master's house is probably, the workplace is probably the biggest pillar when it comes to master's house. So I thought that was really interesting. So thank you for sharing a practical example of how that was addressed. And I look forward to discussing that further during our Q&A session. Without further ado, I'd like to move on to our final speaker before we start our Q&A session later. And that is Ms. Bruktawit Fakadu. Bruktawit Fakadu is a gender equality advocate and Shyvonne scholar. She pursued her studies in gender and development at the University of Sussex. Her early university years during her undergraduate study were transformative because this is where she affirmed her passion for advancing gender equality. As a student keen on seeing conversations about gender equality on campus, she was pleased to have contributed to the establishment of the first student-led initiative dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women in her university. Additionally, she played a role in establishing the Women's Medical Network in Mekelle, which aimed to create a safer space among medical students to discuss issues of gender equality, including on-campus sexual harassment. Bruktawit has worked at the Ministry of Women and Children and Youth in Ethiopia at Seizing the Moment project to review the 1993 Ethiopian Women National Policy and assess the progress over the past 26 years in the women's empowerment and gender transformation agenda. She also worked as a facilitator for empowerment at CARE Ethiopia Women's Enterprise Program. She served as a National Council member in the historical journey of launching the United Nations Association of Ethiopia at the national level. And during the launch of this platform, she also served as one of the board of directors. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you Bruktawit Fakadu. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My section will focus on the role of individuals' personal and collective power to take a meaningful action to contribute for a gender-inclusive society. Next slide, please. So gender is fundamentally a question of power. So whenever we are demanding a more equal or inclusive society, we're raising a question of power. So gender equality is inherently tied to a question of power because historically, societies have been structured around a power imbalance that favor one gender over another. So centuries of discrimination and deep-rooted patriarchy have created a gender power gap in our economies, political system, corporations, and every aspect of life. So women are excluded and discriminated against, starting from household level to every public spaces. So gender-based violence is one of the manifestations of gender inequality and power imbalances, and it is carried out with the intention to humiliate and make a person or a group of people feel inferior. So addressing gender equality involves combating gender-based violence, which are often used as a tool to maintain and control dominance. So gender-based violence is based on imbalance of power. So as with any type of violence, it's an issue involving relations of power. So it's based on a feeling of superiority and an intention of to assert the superiority in the family, school, in the community, and in society as a whole. So gender equality is a question of power because achieving it requires a challenging and reshaping existing power structures that has favored, one gender over another for over centuries. So it involves dismantling inequalities and empowering individuals of all genders to participate equally in all aspects of society. So whenever we're discussing and talking about gender inequality and reshaping existing power structures, it's all we also need to keep in mind that different our fight for gender equality need to be conscious of intersecting power structures, because inequalities in our communities and in our societies are not only a result of patriarchy, they're also a result of the intersecting different power structures. Next slide, please. So whenever we discuss inequality, we also need to ask the question why, despite all these efforts, gender equality has perpetuated throughout generations. So gender equality is often perpetuated through generations by a combination of social, political, economic, cultural, and institutional factors. So I try to put the main factors for the perpetration of gender inequality, which are socialization, social norms and traditions, biases, stereotypes, and institutional discriminations. And as Hope was mentioning earlier, she discussed this point very clearly. And socialization is a process of learning how to interact in a society. So this is where we learn society's do's and don'ts. So the primary agents of socializations are family, and then school and media will follow. And gender equality, as long as has been associated with persistent discriminatory social norms and traditions prescribing social laws and power relations between men and women in society. So cultural norms and traditions often dictate a rigid gender roles, like how to be a man and how to be a woman are mostly defined by gender norms and social traditions. So we learn these discriminatory social norms through socializations, starting from birth. And there are different gender biases and stereotypes, and gender inequality has it starts from the ideology and stereotypes that are assigned to women's and men's role in a society, and discrimination is produced, or it's an action based on these those biased and stereotypes. And institutional discriminations, different discriminatory practices within institutions such as laws, policies that limit women's opportunities and women's rights, contribute to the perpetuation of gender equality. And gender shapes the institutions and how they affect the distribution of power in our community. Most political and economic institutions historically have been dominated by men, and they're tailored to men's experiences. So discussing how gender inequality is perpetuated is important, because it highlights how individuals' actions and our our daily actions contribute to its sustainability. Like from a young age, sometimes even before birth, like, we are socialized to conform to biased gender stereotypes and norms. So these biases, if they are not examined, they can lead to, the perpetration of gender inequality over time. So each of us on our daily life, we either, sustain or tackle patriarchy. So our actions matter, like everyday actions matter for the sustainability or like for tackling patriarchy. Next slide, please. And power is negotiated every day. Like, we're talking about, like, gender equality is an issue of power. Different social changes are, like, issues of social change are like questions of power, and we also have to be conscious that power is negotiated every day. So social change and resistance are interconnected concepts that often coexist within societies. Like social change begin with someone who said enough and want to do something about the problem they want to solve in. So social change and significant alteration in patterns of behaviors, cultural norms, social institutions, and structures over time. And on the other hand, like resistance involves efforts to oppose, to push back against this change. So in the existing social structures and power imbalance, there are people who are like benefited from the structures, who are getting privileges. So there is always a friction between those who want to change it and those who want to sustain those power structures. So I want to highlight that there is no neutral stand when it comes to gender inequality or gender equality. Either you support efforts to dismantle it, or you are ensuring its sustainability. Next slide, please. So as we are saying, like as whenever we are contributing for a social change, we are advocating. When we advocate for a social change, we often aim to shift from a power over dynamic to a more inclusive and equitable approach, incorporating power with, power to, and power within, and to promote collaboration, individual agency, and collective strengths. And power over refers to the traditional and hierarchical understanding of power, when one entity or individual has control over another one, and they, force them the way they should be. And it involves dominance, coercion, and force. And power too is it's a unique potential of every person to shape his or her life. That's like the genuine belief that I can actually contribute something for myself and for the community I live in. And power is about collective of power. It's about collaboration. It's about coming together for a common goal, like for changing our society. And power it emphasizes an individual's internal things and self-worth and self-awareness. It has to do with a person's like self-worth and self-esteem and self-knowledge. Power reason is very important when we discuss gender equality, especially because the way societal norms and traditions portray us affects our image for ourselves and how we see ourselves in our society. So it starts where like the power within, when we can change the power within society can change a lot, because we can come together, collaborate, and change for better. Next slide, please. So understanding these different dimensions of power is crucial for our role in building an inclusive society. Achieving gender equality is a collective effort. but that requires an active participation of individuals. So every action we take towards gender equality, no matter how small it is, we think it contributes to building a better and inclusive society. So our individual actions are very important, which are like our power too. And then when we come together, our power too comes to, being with power with, which kind like, which gives us more power to challenge these existing power structures. Next slide, please. So the sum of individual actions contribute to a broader societal change. By taking these small steps in your everyday life and community, you can contribute to the ongoing effort to create a more equitable and inclusive world for all genders. And I try to jot down a few things that what we can do as an individual, to build a more inclusive society where everyone is valued. We can start from challenging, our internalized stereotypes, as we were discussing, and as Hope was mentioning earlier. Like we were socialized to conform for different gender roles. So challenging those, internalized gender biases and stereotypes we learn is very important, because we have to unlearn and relearn. This is a very important step. And we need to advocate for equality in every opportunity we get, in every sphere, and in every, wherever we're going to be advocates for equality. As I was mentioning earlier, there is no neutral stand when it comes to issue of social change and question about justice. So we all have a role, and we need to speak up. We don't have to wait for others to come and, to talk about anything that we want to see a change in our society. And we need to use more inclusive language. We have to be conscious of the things we say and the language we use. And we need to support gender inclusive actions. There are different grassroots movements, social change movements that are working in different aspects. And like in every community we are living in now, there are like different grassroots movements. So we have to, actively contribute for those movements' success, because the power with our coming together is very important, and we need to use our own platforms. It can be, like family, the way we parent, how we interact with others. We all have different platforms. It can be social media, how we use social medias, and everything. So we need to use our platforms. And one thing I want to say is, like, we all need to remember that creating a culture free from gender-based violence involves ongoing efforts from individuals and communities. Our individual actions coming together as a community, as a collective power, is a very important thing. And gender equality is an ongoing process. I know it took so long, but it's still an ongoing process. So our individual actions are the bricks for the inclusive society we want to build. Like, each of us have a role to build the inclusive society we want to see and we want to live in. So as we live in a world where different social systems intersect and produce different inequalities, our individual actions and collective powers and our efforts for social change also need to be conscious of these intersecting power structures, and we must be, our actions also must be intersectional. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruktawit, for that excellent presentation. And I see that you've stimulated a lot of discussion in the chat. One of the reasons why we wanted to bring in this component about individual power is because, as employees, actors in development spaces, we often think about gender transformation and gender inequality in the context of our programs, but really it starts with us as individuals. So I'm really happy that you could bring in and educate us about that perspective, Dr. I also like how you spoke about how certain people, about how power is negotiated every day and how certain people benefit from the structures that exist. Hence, we struggle between those who are victimized and those who benefit, but also acknowledging that part of tackling gender equality and dismantling those structures is acknowledging as men and women, as individuals, where we may benefit from certain structures and being willing to address those privileges and perhaps not have those privileges anymore for the sake of equality. And I also like how you introduced the power model. This was the first time I ever heard about it, but I think it's really powerful and thought-provoking. And I see that it's also stimulated some interesting discussion in the chat. So thank you so much, Buktawit, for bringing in that perspective. All right, so with that being said, we've reached the end of the presentation portion of the seminar. And I'd really like to thank our speakers for their thought-provoking presentations, which has covered a range of topics, concepts, examples, models, and we've started an interesting discussion in the chat. So we'd like to dedicate this next portion to a question and answer. And I'd like to introduce our moderator for this portion, who is our Regional Director in West Africa, Edwin Obiero. Edwin, before you take over, I'd just like to mention that you are welcome to post questions in the chat. If you also want to speak up, please just raise your hand and I can unmute you. And then we would allow a limited number of people who would also like to ask their questions verbally. But Edwin, please go ahead.
Thanks, Shyvonne, and I'm glad to be moderating this session with all of you guys, wherever you're joining. Thank you so much for joining us. I think very excellent presentations from very distinguished speakers as well. It's the first time, for instance, that I've heard of this, of the model, the Master's House from Hope. And it's very powerful the way that you know, Hope, you've articulated the centers of power and how that is perpetuated in when it comes to gender and disenfranchisement of women. I think one of the things I wanted to highlight just before we pick up on a few of the questions that are coming off of the chat is gender is important because it actually intersects. There's a lot of research that's gone into this, and that shows that if we don't address gender equality, we are not going to meet SDGs as they are framed. Other research shows that it's going to take up to 300 years for us to achieve this. So that means that we are in there for the long haul. There's different people analyze that and take it up differently, because questions around, are we going to wait for 300 years? Can we make it a shorter run instead of a marathon, the way that it is articulated? But it's very good. It's a very good concept. It's a very good to know that we are in here for the long run, and we have to do what it takes to try to achieve gender equality. Because in the end, it's about power, it's about access to resources and formal authority that really males or men are accorded and women do not have it. So then a couple of questions that have come out from the chat. I think as the speakers as our speakers were presenting, there's some questions that I picked up and wanted to just quickly follow up with them one-on-one. And then if perhaps one other thing that I wanted to get from our speakers to talk to our audience about is what are the hopes and dreams when it comes to this topic, because you might easily very quickly get discouraged when you hear about things that are happening in certain contexts. So I'll direct one question to at least one round of questions to each and every one of you. And then the next part of it, if you could please share what your hopes and dreams are on how that looks like. That means, are we moving fast enough, or is it that we need to pace up on and any other conversation that's related? And then we'll have a second round in case we have any more time. So I'll start in the same order of presentation. So that would be a question to Hope. How do you see us moving towards the critical mass? Because currently, I think most initiatives are siloed. You have development actors doing one thing here and others doing something else somewhere else. But what is it that you see is critical to enable us get towards this critical mass?
Thanks for the question, Edwin. We have already started. We have started. We've been at it for a long time. When we talk about the women's movement, when we talk about the youth movement, when we talk about different movements, inevitably, if they are going to transform society, they will address, and many of them do, the issue of gender equality. So we have to celebrate what we have started, and it's because of that that we are here. So let's build on what we have, understand the next phase, but also understand that gender equality doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within our different, other struggles. You cannot separate it from all the other struggles, including decolonizing the continent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And what would you say are your hopes and dreams when it comes to this conversation? Are we moving too slow? Are we at the right pace? How does that look like for you?
Extremely slow, extremely slow. It's like when you are sitting on charcoal and somehow someone is trying to extinguish fire, but for you, that is not fast enough, because someone says, oh, I have to go and get water. Oh, but it's not here. But you are sitting on fire. And I think many of us on the continent are sitting on fire. So we would need to really hasten the process by ensuring that whatever we are doing, we understand issues of resources, because that is needed. Voice, it's very difficult to be liberated without voice. We understand the importance of safety, because I think that my three sisters have talked about safety, and we understand that it is our responsibility. We are in this together. No one is free until we are all free. So when we internalize that and know that, the continent will never be free, you've talked about it, our organizations will never be until we are all on board. So my hope is that we continue to ensure that whatever we do, gender is not by the way, it's the work.
Thank you so much, Hope. Very powerful message coming through. We are in it alone. That change is not going to happen if we are not all part of this journey. And thank you so much for that inspiration as well. I think we leave that on a very positive note, knowing that a lot of things are really happening. So it's too slow. We need to hasten. The next question would be directed to Muna. When Hope was presenting the pillars, one of the pillars was culture. And I've heard a lot about the resistance whenever you try to create change in communities. And it always starts with according to our culture. And I'm sure, Muna, you have very practical examples in Sudan where this has come up, but you've managed to, in a way, overcome it. So I just wanted to get a sense from you, how have you overcome this whenever it comes to implementing some of these transformative programs that we are implementing in Sudan, but also within the workplace? Because I think there was a comment in the chat that the workplace seems to have one of the biggest master's hubs, quote unquote. So what are your reflections on that, Muna?
Culture is quite complicated, and to change culture is not something easy to do because culture has so many aspects, one of which is religion. I don't know whether to identify religion as part of the culture or culture is part of the religion, but religion is and culture, they go together. And to change the culture, you have to have a very high level of awareness, commitment, dedication, and to have a better understanding of what are the proper tools that can be acceptable and the interests that you should start with to do the change you intend to do. Eddie, I very much believe in women, and I very well believe that they can make the change. And they have to start by themselves, and they have to start by helping other women to do the change. We control over the culture because we raise the kids, and they grow up to be a better people for defending women's rights. So we have to start from the new generations. We have to start from our awareness and beliefs that we need to make the change. It's again, I would say culture is complicated, but it is quite doable and possible so long as we would like to do it. And we will be able to do it as women, because in spite of the fact we have a long way to go to reach where we should be, but we have done some change and we can build on that and carry on forward. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Muna. Very powerful message coming from you. Change is possible. We can do it. We are part of that culture. I can already see what your parting shot is going to look like, but I'm still going to ask it anyway. What are your hopes and dreams when it comes to this conversation? You've already hinted at it, but I think you'll be wrong of me to assume what that would look like. So I'm still going to come back to you and ask, what are your hopes and dreams when it comes to this discourse?
First of all, I would say, like, I've been working for Practical Action for the past 8 years. This is the first time to have a webinar for celebrating or acknowledging the importance of the 16 days activism against gender-based violence, which is, I would say, it's a good start. It's a very good start. And I think we should carry on from here and start doing more and more on that. This is one thing. And second thing is on our work, whether to implement our strategic initiative, that we have always to start by identifying the needs of the women at all levels, workplace, communities who are working, everywhere. And then we go and carry on from there by addressing those special needs. That's my hope, is to have women on the top of our agenda in everything we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Muna. Message is loud and clear. I don't think I'm going to add anything to that. Women have to be the top of our agenda in everything that we do. Allow me to move to our next speaker, and that was the next question, and that is addressed to Anna. You have a lot of experience when it comes to involvement of the private sector, because I think the private sector play a very critical role when it comes to development, but also social and economic growth of communities. They have more resources. They can move at a faster speed than NGOs and governments who typically move, and so they have to be a part of this journey. Thank you for sharing your experiences with the USAID funding on how you have managed to bring together a community of practice around private sector companies to reduce sexual harassment in our workplace. I like the example you gave about Rwanda, because Rwanda is actually a geo in this case. But often there's the question on the involvement of women in decision making, and that includes in this particular case, it's the users. I just came recently from a program implementation monitoring in Burkina Faso, and the experiences, the lessons, the feedback that we were getting from women was that when companies come to train them, they often train men. because they automatically assume that women don't have the capacity to manage, say, technical equipment or technical matters in this case. And that happens everywhere else when it comes to education and so on and so forth. So wanted to just quickly pick your brains on how is it that you see the involvement of women in decision making when it comes to what kind of products are sold, because they are the end users, whether it's off-grid solar technologies or productive use of technologies. How do we better integrate them so that these systems work for them?
Thank you very much for the question. So when I think about women in the workplace and decision-making, and how do we get more women in decision-making roles, the first thing that I think about is some of the inequalities in the workplace are visible. So we are able to see how many men and women are attending those meetings or going to those trainings. So those are the visible things that we can see, how many people are in leadership roles. But there are these all other aspects of inequalities that are invisible. And those are the ones that are structurally there that need to be addressed. So when I think about a way to start, or a way to look at this component of start looking at the invisible aspects of inequalities in the workplace that can prevent women from taking those leadership roles or taking those decision-making roles, is to look at the employee life cycle as an entry point of addressing all of these gender biases and inequalities from the entire employee life cycle. So how is the company attracting talent? How are they attracting women to join those male-dominated fields? How are they onboarding them? What is the job evaluations that are taking place? What are the differences? There's research that finds that women are more negatively, the feedback that is given to them is often not as detailed as the one for men, and the words that are used to give feedback is quite different. The number of so when you think about why are they not progressing, there's many reasons why they're not progressing, but many of them are related to these biases that are ingrained in the system throughout the entire employee life cycle. So that will be my first thoughts about how to get more women in decision-making roles, is to look at the structural components that are preventing that in the companies.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna. And I think that really leads us to creating an enabling environment, if you like, leveling the playing field for women in the workplace. And also it's important because some perspectives, it's not just for the sake of it, but it's because you want to bring perspectives that you would normally not have. It's the diversity of it is a strength. It shouldn't be taken as a compliance, because oftentimes companies can easily take it as a compliance aspect. But if you approach it from a competitive edge, you're going to have additional competitive aspects that others don't have. You then in the end become sustainable. What are your hopes? What are your hopes and dreams? It's the same when you talk about this.
Thank you. It's I think for me it's really I'm energized to keep going by the courage and passion of the women and girls that I met around the world. It's something really, really, truly special happens when there's alignment between, your career and your core values. And I know that for me, that I've been working on gender equality issues in the energy sector, my life has become deeply rewarding and fulfilling and continue to work this. So my hopes and dreams are to continue building on the momentum that exists and to not lose hope, because I know that we were talking about behavioral change, or how do we change those behaviors? Maybe something that is takes a long, long time. And it is by, every action that is taken to remove biases, the actions that we take within ourselves, but also actions that are taking place in companies, at country levels, within countries, within communities. So I'm energized to continue working on these efforts, and I dream of a place where there is justice and energy and gender equality in the world.
Thank you so much, Anna. We can feel the energy and appreciate the time and the experience that you've shared with us. I think our last speaker, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but Chigudu. You have a very, I think you are an inspiration. You are an inspiration to the youth. You are an inspiration to a lot of young people who want to create change in spaces where they are. Young people are energetic and I think they hope for a better world. But oftentimes one of the questions that they ask themselves is, how do I start? How do I start? It's clear that I think we've spoken about speaking up. We've spoken about challenging some of these power dynamics. Every time you have a chance, how do you start? Do you have any practical examples that you can share, perhaps to give some inspiration to our audience?
Okay, I think it's a very critical question. I don't think I have the exact answer, but I can say that we can start from ourselves. What we can contribute for a society comes from us. So we can start, from us, from our soul, from our body. I can ask myself, as someone who generally believes in grassroots movements, and as I was just a university student who was, curious about gender and who had questions about my experience, my personal experience as Bruktawit. I had questions about my life experience as a woman. And then I asked those questions and I came up with my friends and we asked those questions to our community. So we can start from ourselves. I think that's a very important thing. Yes.
Okay. And I think that's powerful because, you contribute what you have. I think just to quote what you've said, oftentimes you'd imagine that you don't have a lot with you, but when you come together and you reflect upon your experiences, you can have a contribution. What are your hopes and dreams? How do you see this? How would you want this conversation to move forward, given that we are too slow? Currently, we are too slow. How would we speed it up?
As I was saying earlier, as someone who generally believes in social movements and collective powers, I hope and dream to see more movements, more grassroots movements who aim and hope to change society. So I think I will conclude my hopes and dreams. As Bell Hooks said, my hope emerges from those places of struggle where I witness individuals positively transforming their lives and the world around them.
Thank you so much. Appreciated. I think we have over time by 1 minute. So if you raised a question that we have not responded to, I really do apologize. What we can say, for instance, is this is a conversation. As we said, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We will be sharing ideas, and I love the fact that this is the first time we're holding this in practical action during this campaign. So obviously there could be more coming up, and so let's keep the chat active. I'm going to hand over back to Shyvonne, and thank you. You're on mute, Shyvonne.
All right, thank you very much, Eddie. So thank you so much for moderating the Q&A session. It was very interesting, and like all Q&A sessions, I wish it could have lasted longer. I also saw a couple of interesting questions in the chat that unfortunately we could not get to. So thank you anyway for posing your question. And I hope that one of our speakers can have a look at the chat and see if you can still provide a response to any of the questions that we have not answered yet. But with that being said, we'd like to move on to the final session for today's webinar. And I would like to introduce our Africa Director, Akini Rosalind Wallander, who will be giving closing remarks. So Akini is a force among women in leadership. She's a tireless gender activist, as well as an international speaker and an unwavering climate enthusiast. She has a formidable background in development and humanitarian work and has earned widespread recognition as a strategic thinker, an influential leader who has become instrumental in driving impactful development initiatives. She boasts a track record of over 20 years of experience in international development and humanitarian action. She's an esteemed expert in executive leadership, strategic planning and management, international development, and humanitarian emergency response program management. As I mentioned before, she is currently the Africa Director for Practical Action. Prior to this, she served as Country Director for CORDAID in Ethiopia and Kenya. Within CORDAID, Akini was also a Manager, Director of Women's Leadership, Peace and Security based in the Netherlands, where she managed a global portfolio across 12 countries, as well as Country Director for CORDAID in South Sudan. Her educational background includes a Global Master of Arts in International Affairs from prestigious Tufts University Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, a certificate in Executive Leadership and Strategic Management from Cornell University, a postgraduate diploma in Governance and Political Transformation from the University of the Free State in South Africa, and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Political Science from the University of Ghana, Legon. Akini's commitment to social change extends beyond her professional endeavors. She previously served as a board member for the Africa Center for Disaster Risk Management at Addis Ababa University, contributing her expertise to mitigate and address the challenges posed by disasters. Additionally, she has held board positions with the Board of Women's Cooperative in the Municipality of The Hague, working diligently to empower migrant women and youth, led by enhancing their employability through development of essential market and business skills. And Akini is currently the chairperson for the Global Youth Conference Academy in Gulu. Please allow me to welcome once again Akini with closing remarks. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited that we're having this webinar to really deliberate on issues related to gender-based violence. So for me, the 16 days of the 16 days of gender-based violence, for me, it's a very key international moment for us to pause and to reflect and to call for an end on violence against women and girls. And also, it's actually significant because it culminates on the 10th of December with the International Human Rights Day, because women's rights and girls' rights are human rights. For practical action, we are committed to gender transformation. And this year, we're very happy to join the campaign in solidarity with the global women's movement and to call to an end to gender-based violence, which unfortunately is increasing globally. And for the practical action Africa team, we are going to be spending this period over the next 16 days to reflect more deeply on issues on gender-based violence, but also economic empowerment and what we are doing as an organization on gender-based violence. So we've had some very powerful testimonies from all our 4 speakers who spoke very eloquently and who shared their knowledge with us. We heard from Sudan, lived experiences on how social, political, and economic and psychological manifestations of gender-based violence and the legal framework and the impact of culture on the same. We've heard from Rwanda about gender and sexual violence in the energy sector. And also, I would imagine this also would translate also in the agricultural sector and all the other sectors that practical action works on. We've heard about the community of practice, the engagement in capacity awareness and policy engagements that have made such a big difference in the energy sector in Rwanda, and also the involvement of the private sector. We've heard about the experiences from Ethiopia, the power of the collective, the importance of speaking up, the importance of social movements, and how we can use platforms to build consensus on fighting gender-based violence. Today, this platform has been about creating awareness within our own organizations and hopefully beyond practical actions, and to have an impact into the very programs that we work on. It was about deconstructing the intersection between gender, power, and violence. And every one of us here has or could perhaps even be experiencing or knows somebody who is experiencing violence or has had an experience with the issues that have been discussed today. Most importantly, we have been gifted with a tool, the Master's House, a very powerful tool that is very thought-provoking, and it helps us to understand and guides us in understanding the patriarchy and all the elements and pillars within that have shaped our thinking, that have shaped our society, and also that continue to entrench GBV within our own communities. One of our speakers, Hope, pointed a very poignant picture of the manifestation of GBV within our society. So what then after this? There have been very thought-provoking questions that have been asked. They have been put on us to reflect on ourselves and what our role is in changing the harmful gender norms. I have to say, we must continue to challenge these discriminating practices and attitudes wherever we are and in whatever position that we hold. We have to call for improved laws and services to end GBV within our societies, within our countries, and within our organizations, as global citizens, as a collective, but also as individuals. So I would like to challenge all of us as leaders who are in this room today, and as leaders who are outside, but also as individuals in every sphere of our work. I'm calling on us to continue on championing gender transformation and really strive towards having very concrete outcomes within our programs and in everything that we do. And having said that, I continue to place that challenge on us to invest in challenging harmful gender and social norms. So thank you all very much. And I'd like to hand over to Shyvonne.
Thank you, Akini, so much for those very inspiring closing remarks. So we have reached the end of today's session and we are on time. So I'm really happy about that. It's been packed full of information, lessons, inspiring words. So on behalf of Practical Action, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for everyone in attendance today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy days to engage us and participate in this very important discussion. Our hope is that you've gained some knowledge, found some food for thought, and that the ideas discussed during this webinar today will inspire concrete actions, not only in your work, but also in your everyday life. So gender-based violence is a matter that concerns all of us. It's all of our business, and there is no excuse for the violation of human rights to persist. Each of us have a role to play. I'd also like to extend a special thank you once again to our excellent speakers, Hope Chigudu, Muna Eltahir, Anna Perez, and Bruktawit Fakadu. Your dedication in sharing your expertise and experience and insights with us today are greatly appreciated. This webinar would not have been possible without your valuable contributions. Furthermore, I want to acknowledge Eddie for skillfully moderating today's Q&A session, as well, once again, our Africa Director Akini for delivering those inspiring closing remarks. Your words have undoubtedly left an impact on all of us in attendance today. So please be advised that a recording of this webinar will be available on Practical Action's website. And we do encourage all of you to stay up to date with all of our activities related to the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence campaign through our website, www.practicalaction.org, as well as our social media pages. We look forward to your continued engagement with you on these platforms throughout the 16-day period. However, let us remember that our efforts to prevent and eliminate gender-based violence extends beyond these 16 days. This fight should be integrated into our daily work and our daily lives as individuals and in our communities. With these words, I officially declare this webinar closed, and I wish each and every one of you a pleasant rest of your day. Goodbye.